Welcome back to State of the Association. Thank you for tuning in. I'm your host, Nash Roberts. Today we're going to talk about Russell Westbrook hitting 200 triple-doubles, why Luka Doncic's impact doesn't always match his production, and a lot more on today's episode of State of the Association. Thank you for tuning in. I'm your host, a couple days ago, just set a career mark of 200 triple-doubles, and he previously already had the record for triple-doubles in a career, but he went out and now he's the first person to ever hit 200. This is someone who has caught a lot of flack over the last couple of years for his play, really beginning with that Lakers stint, where ultimately he was just a really bad fit alongside Anthony Davis and LeBron, and that's really where you can see the proper decline of Russell Westbrook as a player and his true value. But even still, this was an all-time great point guard for many, many years, from OKC, of course, to even Houston. He was great over in Houston with James Harden, and in the wave of criticism that Russell Westbrook can often get, he is still an all-time great point guard with all-time great numbers, especially rebounds. You don't really see that often from a guy of his size. Hustles his heart out every single night, plays hard. A team guy, his teammates always love him, never have a bad thing to say about Russell Westbrook. And he gives it his all night in, night out. And whether that's going to be a bad efficiency game where he can almost take you out of it, or whether it's a game where he looks like old Russ once again, he's going to give it his all no matter what. And as a result, just looking back on Russell Westbrook's career, it's kind of an odd one in how the fall-off seems so dramatic. Like as soon as he went from Washington, where he had a really good season, over to LA, it seemed to instantly decline. Ultimately, Russell Westbrook is an all-time great, regardless of how his career is going down at this point. And this new mark of 200 triple-doubles just kind of puts that back into picture. His stint in Denver this season got off to a really bad start, but recently he has been really good for them and a really good piece off their bench, which has been Russell Westbrook's role the last couple of seasons. He's really found himself once again, because with the Lakers, a big issue was that he didn't fit alongside that starting lineup in that major star duo of LeBron James and Anthony Davis. But you put him on the bench, and where he's allowed to create his own offense, as well as the offense for others, and just be the primary ball handler, primary initiator. That's where Russell Westbrook can really thrive at this point in his career, and maybe he doesn't have the ability to do that at a starting level anymore. But he has shown in Denver over these last couple games that he absolutely does still have what it takes to be a contributing NBA player, even if that's off the bench. He can still be a very good point guard, especially in regards to developing young players, just getting them involved. In the wave of criticism that Russell Westbrook can often receive, I think it is appropriate to take a moment to sit back and really reflect on his career and appreciate all that he's done and all that he can still bring to the table. Even if it's not night in, night out necessarily anymore, he still brings that energy. He's, at this point in his career, a great veteran presence and an all-time great point guard, regardless of any criticism you may have of him. And this 200 triple-doubles now, that's just another his first proper breakout last season, and he's continued that on to this season for the Chicago Bulls and had an even more productive year for them. This is a guy who is kind of a late bloomer in terms of his development in the league, because his first couple of years he looked like a solid point guard who showed some potential. But as time went on, it seemed like he kind of plateaued at that level, and that he certainly wasn't going to be the answer at point guard for the Chicago Bulls. So they went out and they got Lonzo Ball. And under Lonzo, that team, they looked amazing for the first stretch of the season there. The Bulls at one time were the number one seed, and DeMar DeRozan was a leading MVP candidate. But then Lonzo gets injured, the team kind of falls flat, and Kelby White still, he looks like he's not the answer at the point guard position. And at this point in his career, we are years into it now, and people aren't seeing a lot of progress from him. But then these past two seasons, in the absence of Lonzo Ball, when the Bulls truly need a point guard, and really with the absence of Zach LaVine and Vucevic for a lot of games, at least on LaVine's end, and even when they are contributing, even when they are out there playing, they're not necessarily contributing to the highest level. Zach LaVine in his own right, his archetype of player, it's not really the best option to be a winning team, a score-first guard who isn't an elite scorer. That's not really the archetype to go. So they really also need Kelby White to not just be a good facilitating point guard. They need him to up his scoring and be a proper modern offensive point guard. And he goes out and does that, and he has his best 2 seasons of his NBA career, and that second one is continuing right now in the absence of DeMar DeRozan as well, who was a great scorer for them. And I really think that he could have been most improved player last year. But the point with all of this is that in the modern NBA, too often we become impatient with a player. Whether it's on social media or just a team's fan base, progression isn't always linear. It can have its stops along the way, and then a player can just all of a sudden, and it's not really all of a sudden, they have the talent. It's just a matter of utilizing that. Because if you are in the NBA, ultimately you are a talented basketball player. It's just a matter of having confidence and being able to utilize that talent to the best of your ability. Obviously, you can argue some have more intangible talents than others, but at the end of the day, they are all talented. And so for Kobe White, his first few seasons, when he kind of plateaued, there was talks of him being a trade candidate for the Bulls to move off and go get someone else. And ultimately, they do get Lonzo. They don't move off of Kobe, but they do get Lonzo and project him to be the point guard of the future. But now it's really turning out that Kobe is that point guard of the future. And it took many, many years, and it just showed it wasn't a flip. You didn't just flip the switch either. Over his NBA career, he continually does get better, as all players do, just by experience, by playing against NBA level competition, because it's so different from college. So he was continuing to get better in terms of his actual game, and maybe you didn't see that on the production side of things. That's because he didn't really unlock the key to utilizing that talent and that experience that he was getting. But then he gets the green light, and all of a sudden now he has the confidence to really prove himself. He has a chip on his shoulder to be the guy for the Chicago Bulls, and he absolutely goes out and does that. And he is truly the point guard of the future for this team. And it's such a great story because in the modern NBA, sensationalization, big headlines, and impatience are such a huge thing. But Kobe White, despite what might have looked like plateauing, ultimately he found a way to utilize his talents when the Bulls needed him to most. And he has become the point guard of the future and the point guard of the now for the Chicago Bulls team. Is he going to go down as an all-time great? Probably not. We need to see another leap from him. And he already had a near most improved player leap. But he could be a couple-time all-star. And that's something that the Bulls haven't experienced too often ever since Derrick Rose left. So for Kobe White to even do that, he would be one of the best Bulls that they've had recently. And it was all just because they stayed patient with Kobe. They let him develop. And then they gave him the green light. And he was able to utilize that to the best of his ability. And he's really redeemed himself, turned his career around from what may have looked like a plateau, and truly became the point guard of the future. And now he is putting up numbers right now for a Bulls team that really doesn't have a lot of high aspirations, but what they can do is rebuild around Kobe White. He is truly the point guard of the future for the Chicago Bulls and the answer at that position when they really had been struggling to find that. And at one point, they didn't believe that it was him, but he has gone out and absolutely proven that he is the guy for the Chicago Bulls. And I firmly believe that he is the player to build around. The Mavericks have gone off to a slower start to the year than you might expect, considering that they made the finals last year. However, in a stacked Western Conference, it's not necessarily your record, especially at this point in the season, that defines you. It's how your team actually looks on the court. And especially what you're seeing from these top guys that you are going to usually go to. And that includes, in this case, Luka Doncic, who has, in terms of the expectations that were placed on him in the offseason, had perhaps the most disappointing start to an NBA season for his career. Because his rookie year, there were some people that, said Luka Doncic shouldn't be the highest draft pick, and ultimately he wasn't. So, and especially as a rookie, you're not expected to do as much. And then the years after that, it's consistently been Luka Doncic. This is the year where he finally becomes that MVP. And that was especially the case this year. Even I bought into it after that playoff run last year where Luka did look like he had improved on the defensive end and became a more winning player. I thought it was going to be a two-guy race, SGA and Luka, but ultimately that has not been the case. And the OKC Thunder are doing really good, though. But for the Dallas Mavericks, it has been a failure on Luka's part to really get himself in those MVP conversations. And ultimately, that's not what matters most as a player. But the issues with Luka Doncic also go in to winning a championship, which is the ultimate goal over MVP, because just the effort that he displays, especially on the defensive end, it doesn't really impact winning the way that it should when you look at his offensive production. Because you look at the numbers, Luka Doncic is having another great year. 28.1 points, 7.6 rebounds, and 7.6 assists. But if you truly watch the games, and I don't want to misconstrue it as empty stats, I don't really like that narrative because at the end of the day, those stats did happen, right? But his defensive performance, it can kind of wipe away those stats. He's consistently getting beat, getting blown by, and just showing poor effort on the defensive end. And ultimately, as a star player, that is required to carry the offensive load like Luka Doncic is. You can kind of get a little bit of excuses made for you because you just have to carry that huge offensive load. And that is all right to an extent. But when what we have seen in past years' playoff runs where he's just kind of fallen into being a bad defender, and this past playoff run, it was the best defender he had been, but he still got exploited by the Celtics in the finals at times. When we have consistently seen that your defensive performance is harming the team in spite of all of the great offensive production you're having, it does lead to conversations of if you're impacting the game properly enough, if you are truly a winning player. And Luka Doncic has all the talent in the world to be a winning player. He's one of the most talented players in the entire league. He can make almost any shot, even some that it looks like he really shouldn't be taking and or making. He has no business doing, and he goes out and makes it. And he's a great playmaker for others, a really good rebounder for his position. That's also aided by his lengthy frame. But at this point, you really can't look past the defense. And it's not to harp on the Mavs' current record, but we've seen years and years of this by now. And every year, Luka Doncic is going to take the MVP leap. This is his year, but it never pans out that way. Because what we then see from him on the court is that, yes, his offensive production is great, and it's not necessarily empty stats, because nothing is ever really truly empty stats. I don't like that term being utilized. But while it's not empty stats, a lot of the offense can be wiped away by him giving up points on the other end, by teams consistently attacking Luka Doncic because they know that he is a weak defender. And at some point, you do have to make an effort to improve on that end. And there have been times where Luka Doncic, he'll go out on defense and he'll get a stop. And it's clear that he has the talent, he has the physical tools to do it as a taller point guard. And with him having a bigger build, it's not like a skinny point guard is going to be able to back him down either. He has the talent and the tools to be a good defender as well. But that effort that you might see on one possession, the next couple of possessions, he's not going to put in that work. And to truly impact the game from what we've seen in recent years, not only does Luka Doncic have to be a plus offensively, he has to be at least neutral defensively. And so often he can't even be neutral. Teams consistently go at him, and there's so many times where he just doesn't put in the effort despite the tools and the talent that he has. And it's keeping Luka Doncic from becoming that MVP version of himself and from becoming the championship level winning player, top tier impact version of himself. If he was even an average defender, we would be having entirely different conversations because of what he does on offense. But he just is able to wipe away those points so often, and teams consistently go out Luka Doncic, and the effort isn't always there. Quite often it's not there. And he's got all the talent, all the tools on the road to do it. It's just a matter of his conditioning and his effort on the defensive end. If he was able to unlock that version of himself on that end of the court, Luka Doncic would without a doubt be an all-timer, without a doubt be an MVP, without a doubt a top player in the league. And he is a top player in the league, but the guy in the league. But he's just not that at this point in his career. And ultimately, I wish the best for him. I would love to see him become a better defender and truly take over the league. But at this point in his career, Luka Doncic has not done that. And the Mavericks record this year, it hasn't been too great. But it's also in a loaded Western Conference, and it's also early on in the year. But we have seen in years past the precedent of this, of Luka getting attacked on the defensive end, and not putting in the most effort, having poor conditioning. And these are things that can be improved. That's the thing. You're not harping on him over something he can't fix. Say, hating on a point guard because of his height, right? But these are things that can be improved. And Luka Doncic has just not done it yet. He has not taken that leap on that end of the court. He doesn't need to be an all NBA, all defensive team member. He just needs to be a better defender. Even a neutral defender. Just not a net negative. Not one consistently getting attacked and consistently getting blown by. If he was able to do even that, he would without a doubt be the true MVP player that he can so often be cited as. And that is the Luka Doncic paradox, where his defense takes away from his production, and therefore his production is not always equivalent to his impact on the actual game. In spite of the eye-popping numbers, there's no doubt that he is an all-time offensive talent, perhaps the best offensive talent in the entire league. But to be the best player in the entire league, he does need to work on his defense, and that has been a consistent issue for the Mavericks. It's shown again this season, but we've seen historical precedent for it as well. And that is the Luka Doncic to start the NBA season. Scottie Pippen Jr. has really shown himself to be a solid contributing NBA point guard for the Memphis Grizzlies. Through these 16 games, in 25 minutes, he is averaging 11.6 points and 5.7 assists. And those aren't eye-popping numbers, but that's still coming in the second unit behind Ja Morant. And obviously, Ja is the point guard for the Memphis Grizzlies. And he's set to be their franchise cornerstone. But Scottie Pippen Jr. in his own right is looking like a really good point guard for them. And so often, in not just the NBA, but in major sports leagues, especially across America, when a former player's son comes into the league, they are very often compared to their father and put under a microscope and a spotlight. Microscope in terms of every little thing being analyzed, even including every flaw, and spotlight in terms of having all that recognition. And so often, you look at a case like Bronny, he would have been better off spending another year in college most likely and really going out and developing himself after having not the best season at USC, and that was partly due to factors outside of his control. But regardless of that, he likely would have been better served spending another year in college. He's going to the G League now, as an example. And so often they're just put under this spotlight where everything they do, it gets attention from the media. And as a result, you can kind of become complacent. Because at the end of the day, you're probably still going to be able to get your money. You're probably still going to be able to get a new contract just off name recognition alone. And just the marketing that you can bring to the team. On the other end, though, they also get put under a huge, huge microscope. And people that are actually watching the games are going to consistently criticize this player for pretty much anything that they do wrong, whether it is fair or not. To them, you look at a guy like Bronny, for example, there are people who've said that his rookie year has been disappointing, and while it hasn't been great by any means, it wasn't really supposed to be. He was a second-round pick, one of the last picks in the entire NBA draft, and was always going to be a developmental project for the Los Angeles Lakers. And he has been just that. So that shouldn't be disappointing. That should be the expectation, especially for a rookie. And a second-round rookie at that. So for Scottie Pippen Jr., he's got that microscope under him too. That spotlight can keep him complacent, but that microscope of criticism, that's always going to be there as well. But in spite of that, he has been able to go out there and prove himself to be a valuable point guard for the Memphis Grizzlies. And he's really carving out a role for himself in the NBA. The Grizzlies recently converted his contract, actually, from a two-way to a proper standard NBA contract, showing that they really believe in him and that he has all the talent in the world to be a proper NBA player, not just off name recognition alone. He's not a G League guy that's just coming in. He's not an end-of-the-bench player. He is a real, proper, rotational point guard. Speaking of the Memphis Grizzlies, though, Memphis has a great track record recently of player development. I'm pretty much their whole bench is undrafted or second round guys they got in the second round. Add on Desmond Bane as well in their starting lineup. But Gigi Jackson, Vince Williams, Jay Huff, Cam Spencer, Scottie Pippen Jr. So Memphis has a great track record of this player development, but it's also reliant on the player to go out there and actually properly perform. The development team, they can do all their wonders, but at the end of the day, you do have to go out there and execute in the actual game. And Scottie Pippen Jr. has gone out and he has done that for them. He's also got really good efficiency, which is often something that you don't see from a young player, especially a young guard like him. But he's been hyper efficient as well. And so Scottie Pippen Jr. has really carved out a role for himself. He has been efficient. He has beat the criticism that can often be placed on you for not living up to your father. And he's never going to be Scottie Pippen, most likely, because that's a very high bar to reach. But he can be a really good to great player in his own right, and he has shown that for the Memphis Grizzlies so far. He has really carved out a role for himself and become a true, proper NBA player. And the Memphis Grizzlies see it as well with that contract being converted. It's a great story for Scottie Pippen Jr. He is much more than Scottie Pippen's son. He is a very good NBA player in his own right, and he's really showing his role and his place in the league this NBA season for the Memphis Grizzlies. And he's still really young too, so he's only going to continue to progress and get better, and he's probably going to be at that starting caliber point sooner rather than later. Scottie Pippen Jr. is absolutely planning his own legacy. The Rockets, as it has been reported recently, do not want to move off of their young core. They have no intentions of doing so. And obviously that includes guys such as Jalen Green and Alperen Sengun, who have been the go-to guys for them over the past couple of years, but also young, promising players like Jabari Smith Jr. and Amen Thompson, who have shown a lot of potential in their own right and being high picks as well. I think that this is a good move for the Houston Rockets because ultimately you brought in Fred VanVleet and Dylan Brooks to help mentor these guys, to help take them over to the next level and just share the experience with them. And Houston looked like a really solid team last year, especially down the stretch, where Jalen Green, for the last 2 weeks of the NBA season, he looked like the best player in the entire NBA. Now, Jalen Green had a really hot start to the NBA season. That has definitely slowed down now. He's down to 19 points, 39% from the field, and he's really just not been able to put it all together. And that has been the story of him his entire NBA career ultimately. But for the Houston Rockets, what else are you going to do but let him develop in real time at this point? Because now you've also invested money into him, but you've invested so much time into Jalen Green. And as a whole, Houston really doesn't have many high expectations for this season, or maybe even the season after that. They're a year away from being a year away, more than likely. And they're not going to be one of the worst teams in the league, but they're also not really fighting with the contenders. Absolutely not. So for Houston, I mentioned Jalen Green there, but just in general, there's no reason to be impatient because this roster as a whole, it's not constructed to win now. So you might as well sit and develop the young guys because you've got nothing to lose from seeing what they can do. Because a lot of these guys have high potential. Jalen Green has never been able to really tap into that. But he has all the talent in the world to be a top scorer in the league. Alperen Sengun is a great playmaking big. There were some calls for him to be an all-star last year. I think there were some people that might have got snubbed over him, but there were calls for it. Jabari Smith Jr., top 3 pick. Amen Thompson, top 5 pick. They've shown a lot of flashes. Not necessarily put it all together. Jabari Smith, though, who looks like he can be, at minimum, a great role player. So he's got a huge floor there that can be valuable to any team. And Amen Thompson's already been a great defender for them. So with these young guys, you have a lot of talent and potential to go and develop. And whether that has happened or not, it's really a case-by-case basis because Alperen Sengun, he has gotten better each and every season. Jalen Green, not necessarily. And the jury's still out because we've seen less years of experience from Jabari Smith and especially Amen Thompson. So we're still waiting to see how they're truly going to progress. But in general, if these guys are all able to become solid to great contributing NBA players, you've got a great core 4 there. And ultimately, I think a lot of that does come down to Jalen Green. But ultimately, I don't know that you're going to find a higher upside player at that position because at his ceiling, Jalen Green can be a top shooting guard just for what he brings on the scoring end. And you can make an argument, like is made pretty frequently, that someone with his archetype, that's not really made to be the first option on a championship team. And I agree with that. But you've got someone else like Alperen Sengun who's able to take that creation load off of him, because Jalen can be kind of one note if he is just a scorer. Alperen Sengun can take that playmaking off of him and do it himself. It's like when the Bulls had Alonzo a couple years ago. And yeah, Zach can't be the number one on a championship team most likely, but Alonzo's able to take that playmaking load off of him. And as a result, although it truly was Zach and Amar, you can make the catch for both of them. As a result, the Bulls looked like one of the best teams in the league to start that year until Alonzo got hurt. So Jalen Green, if you can take the facilitating load off of him and he becomes a better scorer, he in his own right can be a very valuable piece. So you've got an uber-talented core four, and you're not going anywhere fast, and that's okay. You don't have to be impatient. You don't have to rush things because you don't have much to rush. You don't have a win-now roster. You have a roster that you're going to let sit and develop over time in-game. And that's what we're seeing from it, and that's what we're hearing from the front office as well. And that is absolutely the right move. Even if Jalen Green doesn't work out, you still got a very talented three there of Sengun, of Jabari Smith Jr., of Amin Thompson if they're able to all iron out their game and become even better players. That's a really talented young core Houston has. So to move off of that would be a mistake, especially with the way that the roster currently is. You want to stick with that young core. You don't want to fall into impatience because so often the grass is not greener. And you can move off of someone because you think you're going to get better, you're going to get improvements. But at the end of the day, you weren't really set up for success in the first place. And the Houston Rockets would make a mistake if they were to move off their young core. And it's absolutely good that they're not. I think there's a lot of talent there. It's just all about honing that talent, especially for a guy like Jalen Green. He's the one that I personally worry about the most out of that, just because of the way that we've seen. But like I was talking about with Kobe White, progression can very well be linear or not non-linear. It's not 2K. They're not just going to consistently get better each and every season. That's not always the case. Someone like Jalen Green, he could very well have a breakout season. I thought it could have been this year. It hasn't been. But with the level of scorer that he can be and the athleticism and the tools that he brings to the game, he has all the talent in the world to really have a breakout season and come into his own as a player. It's just a matter of being patient with it. And Houston has a great young core. It would be a mistake to move off of them, and the front office sees that too. This team is very talented, and a few years down the line, I could really see them being a great team led by this young core, whether it's 4 of them or 3 of them. Regardless, Houston has the talent to get it done. The Rockets are going to be a great team in the coming years, and they will not be blowing up their young core for current success. They're going to wait out the long game and not take a gamble that ultimately might not work out, and they're going to hone and develop these young guys and make them the best players possible, and they're going to do it together as a unit, and because so often chemistry can be a thing too. Players might not be good fits alongside each other, or they come into a new system, but these guys are getting a chance to play alongside each other already while they're developing. And as a result, they're going to have great chemistry on the court too. Houston has a great young core and a bright future in the coming years. And they are rightfully not moving away from it. Not long ago, he set his career high in points. He scored 45. And this is a player who the prior 2 seasons averaged 30. Before that, he was a 25-point-per-game scorer. And this season, he's averaging 28. So 45 is kind of surprising. You might think with a guy like him who is such a high-level scorer on a night-by-night basis, you might think it's a 50, or even with the way things are going, a 60-point game. But no, it's 45. And Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is the antithesis of so many modern NBA point guards. But he's been successful in doing so. And as a result of that, he has truly become an example for future point guards to look to. Really become the model of consistency in a league that so often that is not the case. The point guard position especially can be very, very volatile. This is someone who's going to have the ball in their hands a lot, be asked to do a lot, especially on the offensive end. And so they can fall into multiple traps. Inconsistency on a night-by-night basis, inefficiency, and a lack of effort on the defensive end. But Shai Gilgeous-Alexander has been a shining example against all of that and become a true winning player in his own right, going against these seemingly norms at this point at the point guard position. First off, I'll talk about that defense. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is one of the better defenders at the point guard position in the entire NBA. And this is while being required to carry quite a big offensive workload. He's the primary scorer and facilitator on that team. And yet, with his physical tools, with his good wingspan, and his height, he's able to go out there and still be a positive defender. And that's something that so often you don't see at the point guard position. And that stops them from going to the next level and becoming an all-time great, a proper elite point guard. Because they just don't have what it takes on the defensive end. And regardless of what they do on offense, unless you're an elite offensive player, not just on ball, but off ball too, a guy like Steph Curry, for example, you're not necessarily able to get away with that defense being lackluster. And Steph in his own right was on a good defensive team. Ultimately, that wasn't necessarily because of him, but he wasn't the worst defender either. So he can honestly be a good comparison. Although him and Shai's offensive games are quite different. But ultimately, putting in effort on that defensive end can take you to the next level at the point guard position when so often you don't see it. And he's not Drew Holiday. He's not even Marcus Smart. He's nowhere near the best perimeter defender in the entire league, but he doesn't need to be. With his offensive production, he just needs to be even a neutral defender. And he goes above and beyond and is a good defender. So for him to do that, that is bucking so many trends of the modern NBA point guard. Think of just great offensive engines. Luka Doncic, Damian Lillard, to a lesser extent, a little bit, D'Angelo Russell. These are guys who are really good offensive players, but ultimately, their lackluster defense can kind of take away some of that impact. Dame has gone his whole career now without winning a championship, of course, as he's caught much criticism for. And ultimately, the Milwaukee Bucks have got off to a really disappointing start. Luka Doncic can often be attacked on the defensive end. And D'Angelo Russell is really struggling to find a home. So these are great offensive talents who were unable to become proper, impactful, truly impactful championship caliber point guards, winning finals point guards, because they were not able to translate much effort to the defensive end, despite any tools that they may have. But Shai has not done that. He's been a good defender. And he doesn't even necessarily need to be that good defender, but he is. So he's gone above and beyond being a neutral and being a positive on the offensive end. He has been even more than that. He has been positives on both ends of the floor, making him one of the most valuable, impactful point guards in the entire league. Next thing is his efficiency. And that largely comes down to the way that Shai Gilgeous-Alexander gets his points. Now, there are critics of his offensive game, calling him a free throw merchant quite frequently. But at the end of the day, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, he does put a lot of points up, and he doesn't always have to take the most shots. As a result of the fouls that he does get, and being a good free throw shooter, he's able to go in and get your team 2 points, and it doesn't even count as a field goal attempt. But even beyond that, he is consistently a 50% from the field kind of guy, and that's something that so often is lost at the point guard position. Because typically they're taking all these perimeter shots. SGA is quite adept at getting to the rim, especially for a point guard. And as a result, he doesn't falter with his efficiency. It's often top of the league at his position because he takes smart shots. He is good at drawing fouls for sure, and elite at getting to the rim. And that play style makes him really, really efficient from the field. And that's always a positive. Because ultimately a player, they can score 30 a night, but if they're doing that on 30 shot attempts a game, that's not really going to contribute much to winning. Because then you're having this guy take all your shots and not hitting that many of them when you consider the fact that not all those are going to be twos. If they were all twos, that'd be 50% from the field. But he's going to be taking some threes. He's going to have some free throws in there. So it becomes a guy whose amount of points are not that impactful when you consider the amount of shot attempts he's taking. But Shea is not that. He's consistently really efficient, really good to get into the line. He's been a really efficient scorer for this team and a high-level scorer at that. And that goes into the last point here about his consistency. Once again, the point guard position can be very volatile. D'Lo is just another guy to bring up here. D'Angelo Russell, he often gets off to really bad starts to the NBA season. Ultimately, he might round it out at the end. Then he gets to the playoffs and he's inconsistent. He's dropping 21 night, having a bad game the next. And since you never know what you're going to get from him, it's hard to game plan around that. Because you don't know if you want to give him too much responsibility and he can't execute, or if he's having a good night and you didn't give him enough responsibility. But SGA, you consistently know what you're getting. There was a running joke last year that he always scores 31. Because every time we look at the max score, it looks like Shea scored 31 each every night for the Thunder. No more, no less. And a guy like D'Lo, at least when he was really having his best years as a net and as a Golden State Warrior, he might score 50. But at the end of the day, if he gives you 11 the next game, it evens out. And he can shoot you in some games, he can take you out of some. But SGA is going to consistently keep you in and shoot you into games. You can trust on him to get you a solid 28 to 30 a night. And you don't need much more because of what he does on the defensive end, because of his efficiency, and just because you can always game plan for Shea and the amount of points that he's going to get. And you can trust him to execute. And that is what sets him apart. That is why his career high is only 45. It didn't need to be any higher. Because everything he does for his team, from his consistency to his efficiency to his defense, it has been the antithesis of modern NBA point guard, but it really needs to be a shining example for future point guards because he has been a winning player in doing so and been the leader for this young Oklahoma City Thunder team who have already exceeded so many expectations. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander should become the model and should become the bar for future NBA point guards and what they should really strive to do. Now, it's not easy to replicate what Shai's doing, and I don't mean to say that in the slightest, because Shai is the top player in the league. But in terms of how he does it, really ethically, is how I would put it. And maybe not the ethical scoring, because that's typically when someone doesn't take a lot of free throws. But in terms of everything he does it really ethically as a point guard. He's not very volatile whatsoever. And as a result, he's become a super impactful, super winning player for the Oklahoma City Thunder and been a great leader for them. And he's going against so many of the standards of the modern NBA point guard and been so successful in doing so. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is really the model for the future point guard that they should all look to. The consistency today's episode of State of the Association. Thank you for listening. I'm your host, Nash Roberts.